overlooked it. Did you put in the note? Yeah.
Look, we had to sit in the assigned seats. We were supposed to sit in assigned seats at my dad's church for Christmas Eve. And then we told Dad, we're like, Dad, we haven't walked into our church yet, so we're not walking into your church. It's just not right yet. And well, I said, I walked with the golf course. So why? And I said, you can put these Baptist and the kids of yours in the car. Just in the room in the back. He's like, how are you? I said, we'll watch it. In the house. She's like, no, like.
Test, test, test.
have a motion by Ms. Bond, a second by Ms. Roundtree. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Ms. Reynolds? Okay, thank you. The board agenda was included in your board information packet. I would like to add an item under closed session. The item is a personnel matter. So if you would please add item E in closed session as a personnel matter. Is there another board member who would like to add an item to tonight's agenda? Mr. Worsham, would you hand up? No. So do we have a motion then to approve the agenda as amended?
I'll make a motion.
We have a motion by Ms. Bradley, a second by Mr. Smith to approve the motion as amended. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes of the December 2020 meeting were included in your board packet. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Or could we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented? We have a motion by Mr. Smith, a second by Ms. Bond to approve the minutes as presented. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We have no recognitions on the agenda for tonight. So the next item on the agenda is the public hearing concerning the 2021-22 school board budget. At this time, the board will receive input from citizens pertaining to the 2021-2022 school operating budget. We ask that speakers give their name and address before they provide input pertaining to the budget for next year. The first person to sign up was George Collins.
My name is George Collins Jr. I reside at 28745 North Main Street, Newsom, Virginia. The first thing I had was a little bit of concern. The school board policy manual and state law both require that a public notice be given for this hearing 10 days in advance. I didn't see one in the newspaper. I've been looking, I didn't see one. So I had a little bit of concern about that. There may not be adequate citizens here if that notice was not given. But as far as concerning the budget, I would think, in my opinion, this is an uneducated financial person. I don't know a whole lot about budgets. Y'all know a whole lot more about it than I do. But from my observations with things that are going on this year, there should be some savings from this year of some type. For instance, just throwing this out there as an example, looking at the line items in the budget, there's $500,000 budgeted for fuel in the transportation department. All the buses are not running up and down the road every day, so common sense would be there should be some savings there. All of the salaried positions are not filled. There should be some savings there. So my thinking would be that whatever you can come together and show, hey, we saved money in this area, I think it would do this board really well, both in public perception, as I've talked about before, to say, look, we saved money in this area because of everything, because we were running a limited schedule, we were running virtually, we saved money in this area, and we're working hard to be financially responsible for the citizens of Southampton County. Thank you.
Thank you. No other person signed up for the public hearing. So I declare the public hearing closed. The next item on the agenda is the public comment period. The Southampton County School Board recognizes the importance of receiving public input on issues affecting students and staff in our school system. Indeed, board policy states that the members of the community are invited and encouraged to attend board meetings of the Southampton County School Board to observe its deliberations. During the public comment period, board members will not comment, engage in dialogue, answer questions, or take action. The public comment period is the citizens to share their views with board members. According to board policy, the board chairperson is responsible for the orderly conduct of meetings. To ensure an orderly process, our board asks that those wishing to address the board adhere to the following guidelines. We ask that individuals wishing to speak sign up for public comment before the start of the meeting. The time limit for each individual to speak is 3 minutes. We have a visible timer to help speakers know how much time they have. Also, as chairperson, I will inform speakers when they have reached their time limit. Speakers cannot transfer their opportunity to speak to others. Speakers should address their comments to the board, not to the superintendent or other audience members. I will call forward speakers in the order in which they signed up. So the first person to sign up was Margaret Cross.
Good evening. My name is Margaret Cross, and I'm a parent of a senior here at SHS. I'm going to say what I've said before. These kids need to be back in school. We've been dealing with this since last March. We are going on 10 months now as a community. We've learned so much about COVID and who it hits the hardest and how to treat it the best possible way for each scenario. It's not curable, so to say, because we can't seem to, you can't get rid of the virus completely out in the environment. But the school systems and independent schools around us have dealt with going back pretty bravely and do not appear to be in fear of the virus. I said it in October, I'm going to say it again, if we ask our parents who want to come back, we probably have close to half the population wanting to come back. So then put it on a hybrid model, we got a quarter of the kids in here on each day. This would at least give them some normalcy when it comes to instruction. COVID slowed us all down at first, but the crowds at Walmart, Food Lion, eating establishments, everywhere that you go, Tractor Supply, everywhere I've been to take care of my family, everybody's out there. Not going to school is not slowing down the virus. It's out there, no doubt about it. So why are we living in fear of a virus only at school? We haven't locked down our county, we haven't locked down Food Lion, Walmart, any of that, but we've halted the schools. We need to make a plan to get these kids back in school, put it in place, have a plan, have a plan for when and if COVID shows up, just like you've already done with your staff, and move on. You don't need to panic when something goes, when something doesn't go right. Handle it the way that you have the emergency plans in place. Inform the community, and let's keep on going. You all are educated people making decisions for our students. So let's be smart about it. Our future depends on these kids, and they aren't getting what they need this way to be successful leaders for tomorrow. I think we're gonna, all be in a world of hurt if we just don't focus a little bit more on our kids and their education and what we've done for them over the last 10 months. We need to move forward and get on with the program. Thank you.
The next person is George Collins.
Took the month off last month so I can speak twice tonight. One thing I want to talk to you about tonight is I've attended a lot of school board meetings over the years, and I feel like it's important to do it because it's important to be an informed citizen. I feel like it's important to know what's going on and to be involved with the process. It's the reason I speak. We have an opportunity, and I feel like we should exercise our rights and do that. But one thing that has always bothered me a little bit when I come to these meetings is the presenter comes to this podium, and you'll probably see it later on tonight, and they make a presentation, and they refer to the school board packet. They'll say, as you can see in your packet, or it's in your packet. And I've always thought, well, it'd be really nice to see that, to know what's going on, what they're discussing. And I found out that actually, according to your policy, it's 3 times in your policy manual, that at least one copy of all agenda packets, unless exempt, all materials must be furnished that are furnished to members of the school board for a meeting shall be made available for public inspection. At the same time, such documents are furnished to members of the school board. Then I also found out that it is actually state law that all public boards do that. And my question is, I look at the website and I see the agendas on the website, and I see things like the attendance and things like that are there, but the rest of the information's not there. The minutes from the meetings are not there. You just approve the minutes in the packet, but you can't see that anywhere publicly. So that's not complying with your own policy and state law. So please, do better, put the information out there so we can see it. Thank you.
I would like to thank all the individuals who addressed the board tonight. We have no matters from previous meetings tonight, so we're down to action items. We have 3 action items tonight. The first action item is the financial report and payment of bills. Dr. Shannon.
Mrs. Carr will make that report.
Good evening, Chairman Goodwin, school board members, all present tonight. If I can bring your attention to the preliminary expenditure report for the month of December. You can see that our revised budget is now at $35,156,598.49. This amount includes recent appropriations of $1,755,819. These funds were received during the period of July 1st through November 27th. 1.6 million of these funds were approved by the county for the purchase of COVID-related materials and services. $24,000 was collected for retiree health insurance premiums, $56,000 for the prescription drug rebates, $4,158 from the electrical demand response program, $11,539 from Medicaid reimbursements, and $10,725 came from expenditure refunds. The actual expenditures through December 31st total $14,206,251. This leaves us a balance for the operating budget as of December 31st of $20,950,346. Please note that as of the date of this report, 40.41% has been expended from the operating budget. Are there any questions tonight? If not, the bill list has been attached to the agenda for the board's approval. Thank you.
We have a motion by Mr. Pope. Do we have a second? We have a second by Mr. Worsham to pay the bills as presented. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the Child Nutrition Programs Procurement Plan. Dr. Shannon.
Yes, Mr. Melby will make a presentation on the procurement plan. Mr. Melby?
Good evening, Dr. Goodwin Board. With you tonight is our triennial report to the Virginia Department of Education School Nutrition Program for the Southampton County Public Schools Procurement Plan. This plan, which we submit, like I said, every 3 years, outlines the processes and procedures taken by Southampton County Public Schools Food Service Department to ensure that we are abiding by all local, state, and federal procurement regulations. This plan covers everything within the Food Service Department, from the most obvious food to equipment and food containers. This is a review that will ensure that the unique requirements of the Food Services Department are being acknowledged and met in our procurement procedures. Any questions?
Questions? So do you have a motion to approve the Child Nutrition Program Procurement Plan? We have a motion by Mr. Smith. We have a second by Ms. Bunn. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Melvin.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the school-based health center. Dr. Shannon.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Earlier this fall, we began conversations with the Overseas Healthcare Foundation, Bon Secours, Southampton Medical Center, and the School-Based Health Alliance. And one of the things that we discussed was the
are certainly in the infancy stages of this discussion. However, we do recognize that there are many advantages to developing and establishing a school-based health center on one of our campuses. Some of these advantages are that we will be providing age-appropriate healthcare services such as primary care, dental services, mental and behavioral health services, as well as substance abuse and counseling services right here on one of our campuses. Students will also be treated for acute as well as chronic illnesses right here on our campuses. Now, this school-based health center will not replace the school nurse, but the school-based health center will work hand in hand with our school nurses. And so what I'm asking tonight is that we are able to move now into developing an advisory board and a planning committee, and we are still in the exploratory phases for the school-based health center.
You please note that at this time, there is no financial obligation from Southampton County Public Schools to explore this possibility.
Correct. Oversee Healthcare Foundation is paying for the exploratory process.
Any questions for Dr. Shannon?
Who is developing the advisory board and planning committee?
We all are.
Oh, the whole group is, okay.
Yes.
Any other questions? Do we have a motion to approve?
Make a motion.
We have a motion by Ms. Bradley, a second by Ms. Roundtree. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We're now down to informational items. And the first item is an EduLog transportation study. If you remember, last year, we asked Dr. Shannon to look into conducting a study to see how we could improve the efficiency of our transportation system. And in order to do that study, Dr. Shannon reached out to EduLog. So the study then was intended to identify ways that we could improve the efficiency of our transportation system. So we have that, a summary of that study tonight. So Dr. Shannon?
Yes, we are actually going to participate in the presentation with EduLog via Zoom, and it looks like Mr. Hatch has them pulled up.
Let's see, can everybody hear me?
We can.
Ah, perfect. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here tonight. It's a pleasure to be speaking with all of you. I was watching the board meeting earlier on, so I've been keeping track of what's been happening. And yeah, I'm happy to present the results from our transportation optimization study that we conducted for Southampton County Schools. Now, before we go on, are there any initial questions or comments from the board?
No.
Okay, perfect. Now, I will just dive into the slides of the study because explaining all of this will take a little bit, but hopefully by the end of this, we'll all have a good understanding of where we're going to be going with our study and the results that we've gained from it. So, Southampton County Schools engaged EduLog a number of months ago to conduct a transportation optimization study on their 2019-2020 data. We originally looked at using data from the coming fall, but due to the ongoing novel coronavirus situation, it was determined that the data we would be using is not representative of normal conditions at the district. And so the most recent data that we had available to use for it was from March 2020, which was right before the onset of the pandemic. This data utilized ridership surveys conducted by your transportation department, as well as data that had been built in the EduLog system. And with that data and ridership survey, we were able to get an accurate picture of what your transportation was doing prior to the onset of the COVID virus. Now, this study took the form of two phases. The first phase of the study utilized run and route optimization to build a routing system under your current conditions. And when I say current conditions, I say non-pandemic conditions. And what this means is that bell times and windows and a lot of your current policies were not changed. This was simply utilizing computer-based algorithms and our consulting trained eyes to try and improve upon your current transportation situation. This meant reorganization and restructuring bus runs, as well as the routes that they operate during the day. And after we were finished with that, we took the results, analyzed them, and looked for where we could find improvements upon the transportation data once we moved into the second phase. Now, the second phase of the study resulted in a bell time analysis due to our findings that we found in the first one. And the whole idea behind the second phase of the study was to separate the bell times of your middle and high school schools farther away from your elementary schools. And in this case, it meant starting the elementary schools at later times. This study, or I should say this portion of the study, focused on incremental changes to your bell times rather than extreme changes. And the purpose we did that was to identify relationships and trends with your school district and transportation so that we could be able to provide good recommendations to the board and get a full, complete understanding of what your district faces in terms of constraints and opportunities for improvements. Does this make sense so far, people?
Yes.
Perfect. But before we go further, I would like to define a few terms for the board, just because when we get into discussing transportation, it can get a little bit overwhelming very quickly with terms and definitions. To start off this real quickly, a stop in our data system is a physical location where students are picked up and dropped off. Now, this is quite obvious probably to every board member here, but it's good to review all this. While a stop is a physical location where the students are picked up and dropped off, a run is a sequence of stops that a bus makes when transporting students to and from school. Now, this is a single part of a bus's full day activity, and the run is completed when all students are delivered to the school in the morning or their respective bus stops in the afternoon. Now, a bus can make multiple runs throughout a day, and the collection of all the runs that a bus will make throughout an entire day is called a route. This includes morning runs, afternoon runs, and in certain cases, midday runs. Now, midday runs were not utilized in this study for certain obvious reasons, basically to improve our visibility into the data and reduce certain areas that we would not really have much control over. Moving on from this, a school has a bell time, of course, that we define as when the school starts or ends the school day. Now, to add to this, a collection of bell times, say the 4 elementary schools that you have starting at 9:45 or 8:45 in the morning, is called tier in our system, which is basically a group of schools that start and end their school day at the same time, roughly. Now, a standard transportation system has 2 or 3 tiers. In the case of your district, you guys have 2, with the middle and high schools starting at the same time, followed by the elementaries in the afternoon. In this lower graphic, I try to illustrate this a bit, with these turquoise bars here representing the time period a bus is conducting a run, transporting students to school in the morning for your middle and high school. And then afterwards, it conducts an elementary school run, transporting students to the elementary schools prior to the start of their school day. Does this make sense so far to people?
Yes.
Perfect. Lastly, the last 2 terms I'd like to bring up are what we call loaded and deadhead travel. This is specifically referring to the exact activity a bus conducts on its run. Now, loaded travel is the time and distance required for a bus to complete a single run. This means picking up students from stops and transporting them to their school of attendance. In the afternoon, this is when they pick up students from the school to when they drop all of their students off at the last home stop, which is pretty straightforward. But the additional part of all of this is deadhead travel, and that is the time and distance required for a bus to finish the first run and get to the start of their second run. It can therefore be thought about as the required amount of time between 2 runs in order for the connection to be feasible. And I added to this graphic down here in order to illustrate that deadhead travel section prior to the start of the elementary school run. A bus will come, pick up students at the start of its middle and high school run, drop them off at school, and then after the school bell time has started, it will begin traveling to the start of its next run. It travels and then gets to the first stop with elementary students, conducts its run, and drops them off at school. Are there any questions?
No.
Okay, excellent. Now that we've got some terms defined, I think it's probably fair to look into the current conditions at your district. Now, like I said, we used data starting from March 2020 because that was the last time a ridership survey was conducted under pre-pandemic conditions. Now, in the survey, we found out there were roughly 2,035 students transported across the full day. These students are assigned to 1,400 stops, roughly, with buses conducting 112 runs across the entire day. Now, these 112 runs include both the morning and the afternoon period, which in the planned data, under ideal conditions, would be serviced by 39 full-sized buses. Now, this last row here is where we started to get into the heart of the first phase of the study, which was the total number of bus drivers available to the district, which unfortunately was 4 drivers short at a total of 35 drivers. Now, this is where we were trying to solve for a lot of our transportation optimization study, was trying to get transportation improved to where we would drop the total number of required buses from 39 to 35 without reducing the quality of service that students are receiving, and also ensuring that buses are abiding by all the school policies currently set out for transportation. Now, moving on from these numbers and keeping these in mind, we get back to what we were talking about here, where we had 35 drivers for the 2019-2020 school year. And it's basically restating what I just discussed in the previous slide. Now, when we came to actually optimizing your data and trying to improve upon your transportation routing network that you currently have, we've discovered that there were approximately 2 primary challenges that face Southampton's transportation department. The first is the sheer size of the district. And also, when you combine that with the low population, it creates a scenario that is difficult for more rural school districts across the nation. I have worked with a number of districts across North America, including numerous in Virginia, North Carolina, Idaho, Alberta, Canada, you name it. And this situation that faces school districts is something that I often run into, and is something that can't easily be solved. It's not necessarily like something that can be attributed to anything, but it is something that has to be accommodated. To kind of reinforce this, I mean, your county, Southampton, while it is the 10th largest in the state by square mileage, it is ranked in the bottom third of the state for population. To add to this, your district is dominated by agricultural and rural land, with small centers of population located more near the southern and central parts of the district. Even more so, students that are living across the county often are picked up and dropped off at their home address, meaning that students can't really walk any distance to any stop due to usual safety issues, which is understandable, and that's something that I will often see as well in my travels. Now, while point number 1 is not something that can really be easily dealt with, the second main constraint that your district faces is one that we actually focused on later in the study, and that is the structure of your school bell times. Now, currently, you guys have about 60 minutes between when your middle and high school starts in the morning to when the elementary school starts later on. Now, 60 minutes might seem like a significant amount of time between schools, but we have to remember that when it comes to the sheer size of your district and the amount of widespread students that are across, it penalizes all of your transportation. What it comes to is that you guys were actually short on the amount of time you need for a bus to make a run for both middle and high school and the elementary schools. And that comes back to the whole point of deadhead travel. the amount of time required for a bus to finish one run and get to the start of the second. These statistics in this table reinforce the point I am making. On average, in the first row of this table, a bus has to travel roughly 12.1 miles to get from the end of its first run to the start of its second. It maxes out at 22 or 24 miles, depending on which time of the day you're on. And because of the size and distance and rural roads involved in your county, this often averages out to an additional 20 minutes of travel required for buses. So while you guys may have 60 minutes between, your first set of bell times and your second set of bell times, 20 to 22 minutes of that is already used up by buses that need to just travel just to get to the start of their run. And when we look at the maximum times required, we see that sometimes this can take well over half an hour for buses to get to the very farthest parts of your district. Are there any questions so far?
No.
Okay. I will add a quick disclaimer here that when we're talking about the maximum distances and maximum times, these occurred for buses that were transporting middle and high school students to their school of attendance and also back home. The reason is because you guys have a single middle and elementary school, and while it's located in the center of your county, students have to be transported from all corners of the county to and from school each day. This contrasts with the 4 elementary schools that you have spread across your district, which breaks down the total size that they need to service into more manageable chunks. So when it came to optimizing your data, the biggest challenge turned out to be the middle and high school students because they required the most amount of resources for time and mileage to maintain the same level of service. This chart here finally will illustrate what I am trying to get at the heart of here. This chart shows the timeline from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. on an average typical planned day of operations. What it shows, each bar shows 5 minutes span of time, and each bar will show the number of buses that are currently active on the road and transporting students. For example, if we were to look at the 6:30 period right here, we would see that roughly 15 students or 15 buses are required to transport students to and from school. Now, as we go on with our timeline, we see that we have 2 peaks clearly defined in the morning, which correspond with the middle high school students being dropped off at school, and as buses travel and pick up students and transport them to their school of attendance, before finally ending for the morning. Now, this morning period shows that bus activity is well below the 35 drivers required to service them. And it has 2 clearly defined peaks showing a good amount of separation of bell times. Now, the issues that we find are when we get to the afternoon. While having the middle and high schools start first thing in the morning allow them extra time to perform their runs without penalizing anybody, this reverses in the afternoon. For each bus has to then start from the center of the county and sometimes drive to the far edges of the county, dropping off students. And even though you have 4 elementary schools to shorten the distance and try to pair runs better, you can see clearly here that there is no dip in the active number of buses. There's literally not much time for a bus to really manage and have enough spare time to drive between runs. And this is why the solution tops out at about 39 buses, which is above the 35 drivers that you guys would have last year. Are there any questions?
No.
Okay. Now, when it came to optimizing, the first phase of this study utilized run and route optimization in an attempt to solve for the district's geography and sheer size. Bell times were the same, windows and arrivals, departure times, all those policies were kept in place. So what we were trying to do is make a solution that was as realistic as possible and trying to see if our computerized algorithms and trained eyes could beat what your district was currently doing, with the ultimate goal of trying to get down to 35 buses. To do this, we used 3 different approaches: Scenario A, Scenario B, and Scenario C. And each one had a different way of dictating how a bus would conduct its run each trip. In scenario A, we allowed the buses to have longer run times, as high as 60 minutes in some cases, with the benefit of it being higher student loads, meaning that each bus could transport more students to a school with a single run if it was allowed to travel for a longer time. Now, we will skip scenario B for a second and talk about C, which is the opposite end of the spectrum. These runs were forced to have shorter run times, sometimes under 40 minutes maximum. The downside of this is that we had smaller student loads. But the upside of this is by increasing the number of runs and shortening them, the idea was that a bus would not be penalized on time and could therefore make it to and from school on time without being impeded by the district size, sheer population distribution. Finally, scenario B was a middle-of-the-road approach. It tried to balance run times and student loads between shorter and longer, depending on what was deemed optimal by our consulting experts. Are there any questions about these three approaches so far?
No.
Okay. Once we finished optimizing all three scenarios, we got the following results. Currently, you guys have 39 planned buses, of course, and 56 runs per AM/PM period. Now, this is just simply half of the 112 runs that occur throughout the whole day. So right now, I'm comparing numbers for either the AM or PM period, which, because they are mirrored, can be basically shown as half totals. So currently, you guys have 56 runs serviced by 39 routes. When we optimize for scenario A, B, and C, we have differences that we're trying to get us down to the 35 bus number. Unfortunately, neither scenario of any of these managed to get down to 35 buses. In the best case scenario, we were able to take 2 additional buses off of your road. And while this will not solve the issue of your driver shortages, it would at least offer some operational relief. But the fact still remains is that even with our consulting trained eye and our algorithms, we had a very difficult time improving upon what your district currently operates or is supposed to operate under normal conditions. In some cases, such as scenario A, where we allowed the buses to make longer runs, we saw reductions in the total number of trips a bus needs to make. However, once we allowed the buses to have shorter and shorter runs and lower loads, we noticed that more trips were required. But what's interesting is that if you were to allow your buses to make shorter trips, it would actually reduce the total number of buses you need, versus scenario A, which is the closest to what you guys currently operate in the district, which saw no change. Are there any questions about this table? Excellent. Now, since we could not improve upon your transportation to the point of hitting 35 buses, the second phase then started to look at where we could potentially find improvements to your district. Now, we've looked at several different potential options. We looked at trying to set up a transfer system or shuttles, and we looked at different options, but most every way we looked at it, it was very difficult to find ways to kind of tinker with your school policies and get us down to the 35 bus limit we needed. So what we ended up realizing finally was that we needed to focus on school bell times and how they are structured in your day. Now, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, the issue is that you guys have 60 minutes between your elementary and secondary schools, but that 60 minutes is not enough. So then the question then becomes is how much time do you need to add to the 60 minutes before you can get down to the 35 bus number or even below it? So when we went into this, we took the results from scenario A, B, and C and the runs we built, and then we applied bell time shift in 5-minute increments, specifically starting the elementary schools 5 minutes later each time, and we would re-optimize the data and then see where the numbers would fall. And then we would make another 5-minute shift re-optimize, see how many buses we required, and then so on and so forth until we reached the numbers we needed. Now, in principle, if you were to say add, another 40 minutes to your 60-minute bell time gap, unrealistically, every student could have, perfect service, but that's not realistic. We needed to find something that was palatable for the public and also realistic, because you don't want to have to change bell times more than you need. So that is where we worked to try to identify relationships and where that magic number was. Now you'll recognize this chart from what I talked about before. And to illustrate this a little bit, we did that. By starting the elementary schools later, we now were attempting to create these dips, these gaps in time where buses would not need to be picking up and dropping off students, which would allow buses potentially enough time to service all students with 35 buses. Now this is a simulated result, but it still kind of gets the point across of by shifting elementary school start times a little bit later, you give your transportation department some breathing room in order to be able to perform its same level of service, perhaps with an even better degree of satisfaction. So over 15 different results were generated through this phase of the study. And while this table is very dense and difficult to look at, I decided it would be optimal to box out the results that were most preferable. In this case, I boxed these scenarios for A, B, and C for each 5-minute increment. So the first row basically is just the current model. 39 buses, 37, 37, utilizing the run data that was built for each scenario. These results, if we go back a little bit, are basically what we've listed here. So this first row is basically the results from the first scenario. With each row that we go down, we added 5 minutes to the school starting time for the elementary, maximizing out at 20 minutes, where we got the lowest total possible solution of 26 required buses. The dotted dash lines are put around the boxes where we reach the 35 bus number or get below it. I have excluded these options here because in these scenarios, there was a limit to how much we could reduce the number of buses. In scenario C, the absolute minimum number of buses we could get was 35, whereas in scenario B was 30. And this is the result of scenario A being scenario A had the benefit because you could allow buses to go the longest period of time, pick up the most number of students, service the highest number of stops. And so by doing this and by basically allowing buses to take their time, we were able to separate school bell times up to 20 minutes and reduce your bus totals from 39 planned routes to 26. Now, when it comes to comparing all of this and trying to tie it all back into what you guys are currently doing, I do have to say that given the constraints and parameters that your transportation department faces, that I conclude that they are still operating at a relatively efficient level. And I say relatively efficient, with the utmost meaning, because these guys are constrained on the amount of resources they have. The number of students they have to transport hasn't changed. If anything, it will probably increase over time. And they have a driver shortage. So given all of these issues facing the school transportation department, I have to say I was quite impressed that they were able to make it work as well as they did. Because a 4 driver shortage in a 39 bus district is significant. I mean, that is a huge percentage of your drivers that are either not available on any day or, might even be sick. I mean, that's the thing is that 35 buses assumes that every driver is operating every day. And given the shortfalls facing the transportation department, I have to say that they were operating at a pretty good level. There really wasn't much that they could improve upon just by tinkering with the run structures and how the buses behave. And so when we finally realized that, we came to the realization that bell times were where the greatest potential savings could be met. And that is essentially a shorthand presentation of our results. I will now open up the floor to discussion and questions for anybody who wants to add or inquire anything.
Any questions from board members? Shannon?
I think one of my questions would be if we extend the ride times, which sounds like what we're looking at with scenario A, what is the longest time that we can have a student on bus?
So the maximum amount of time that we set for the study was 60 minutes. And that was kind of under current school board policy that we don't want students riding any longer than an hour. There was the occasional rare case where a student might be trapped a little bit over the 60-minute mark by a minute or two, but that was mainly due to these students that lived on the very far edges of the district that were middle and high school students and had the farthest to travel to school. But in general, I was able to get in each scenario, each run, at or under 60 minutes.
They would not have to be picked up any earlier.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Okay. They would not have to be picked up any earlier than what they're being picked up now in the morning.
If I'm hearing you correctly, you're asking if buses were picking up students any earlier than they currently are?
Yeah. Yes.
In that case, the answer is no. They're not picking up students any earlier than they normally are. And that was especially true of the middle and high school runs, because those buses already have to travel quite a long distance. And due to the driver shortages, a lot of these runs are already traveling longer than 60 minutes. And when we were building them in optimization, we picked the most optimal path possible, which minimizes the total number of distance and time required to transport all students to school. And this resulted in students never being picked up earlier than, I believe, well, none of them really had a travel time longer than an hour. And that meant that, given against what you guys are currently doing, the runs were providing a better level of service than currently at the district. Does that make sense?
Conversely of that, would our elementary students be getting home any later than they are now?
If I'm hearing you correctly, you're asking me if elementary schools could start any later than they are in the study?
Would the students be getting home any later than they are now?
No. In the normal situation of scenario 1, where we looked at just trying to beat your current policies, students were actually getting home earlier than normal at the end of your day. However, as we started the elementary schools later and later in the day, it was the elementary school students who were getting to school or getting home from school 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, or 20 minutes later than normal. So when we started shifting the elementary school bell times later, these students were getting to school or getting home later in some cases than normal. Hopefully the chart here somewhat illustrates my point, where as you start the elementary schools later, students by naturally are getting home later, sometimes as late as 5:40, potentially. But again, that's why we looked at each 5-minute increment in the study, because we wanted to minimize the penalties we were imposing upon, say, students and parents. Does that make sense? Okay. And just to reiterate, you know, under the scenario 1, students were getting home earlier than normal. However, once we started shifting the elementary school times out, these elementary school students were getting home from school later and later and later, usually by the amount of time that we were shifting. Whereas the middle and high school students had their service unaffected. In cases with optimization, had a slightly better level of service and shorter run times.
What time do elementary school students get home now?
Which ones get home the latest?
Yes.
That is a good question. 1 second, I need to remember my numbers here. I believe the ones that were getting home the latest were Capron Elementary School, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. And a lot of that had to do is because Capron is located in a very low population part of the district. And so you had buses traveling a lot farther and servicing fewer students. And that's just kind of a natural consequence of where it's located and the size of its attendance zone. So that was something that was kind of just a natural consequence of it.
What time do they get home?
I can get those numbers to you specifically, but I have to say that with each scenario here, the time they get home is different. So it really depends on the amount of bell shift you are asking for. But if we were to assume that we use if we were even to use the same runs as you guys are currently using, it's easiest to think about as they're getting home either 5, 10, 15, or 20 minutes later. If we were optimizing under current conditions, students are bound to get home about roughly the same time as they currently are. That's why we couldn't really get buses down to 35, and we couldn't really reduce those totals in the first phase, because how you guys currently build your runs is fairly efficient. So I guess the answer is it depends on how much you want to shift the elementary school start times.
Well, and so we can assume that if they're gonna get home however much later, we would adjust the bell time. But with that, if we're then gonna have the benefit of our transportation system running more efficiently, we're gonna be guaranteeing hopefully that they're gonna get home on time, more so than they have been, because it's been an inefficient system. So even though we'd be backing it up by a few minutes, we're gonna hopefully be more prompt with that minutes.
I would agree with that line of thinking. How your data is currently planned with 39 buses would allow students to be transported within the 60-minute time limit, which is a good, efficient system. The problem with your district is that when you don't have the number of drivers required, in this case you're 4 drivers short, compromises have to be made. Stops have to be moved onto different runs, buses have to travel longer and farther, and it just generally, students arrive and depart from school later. It penalizes the system. So even though you guys have the current plans in place to operate efficiently, this driver shortage is what's really creating all the commotion.
Any other questions? Dr. Shannon, you want to wrap up?
Thank you, Spencer, for the work that you have done with the optimization study. And basically, we just want to take the information into consideration, and then we'll move forward.
Absolutely. Well, it was a pleasure to be here tonight. And if there are any questions that come up after this meeting, feel free to get in touch with me. And I will be more than happy to address any questions, comments, or concerns that you might have. And in the end, I'll probably leave it with this final note of, when it comes to trying to improve on transportation in a rural system, there's really never any good options. You guys are usually given less and asked to do more with. And that's why I'm usually impressed with a lot of districts like this, because what the transportation department's able to do versus what they're given is something that, it's hard to improve upon. And when it comes to looking at bell times, that's a tough subject for anybody to swallow. Even modest shifts, can be, provoke a large ear from the public. But in the case of your district, I think that you guys do have some palatable options where you don't have to shift things up very far in order to give yourself the breathing space to be able to improve the level of service you're providing to students. And hopefully, if you can reduce the number of buses and drivers required, it might end up putting more money back into the transportation department and back into your classroom. So I'll happily end with that note. And thank you all once again for giving me the time to speak tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Best wishes, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
The next item on the agenda is the after-school plan. Dr. Shannon.
virtual, which is the phase that we're in now. Phase 2 being hybrid, phase 3 being hybrid 4 days a week, phase 2 was hybrid 2 days a week, and then phase 4 being in person all 5 days a week. And of course, these phases are contingent upon the metrics being favorable to our community. So when you look at phase 2, and that is the phase that I am proposing that we move to. Looking at phase 2, we first of all have to have mitigation efforts in place. And I've talked about these mitigation efforts probably since July, but I'll still mention them. And some of the mitigation efforts that we have are health screening upon entering buildings. We'll have frequent hand washing. We'll have sanitation breaks. We will require masks. We will require that students maintain at least 6 feet of social distancing, sometimes 3 feet with masks. And we will work with primary health care providers as well as BDH when it comes to contact tracing, isolating, or quarantining students. The attendance mode will be hybrid, and in looking at the hybrid mode, I'm proposing that we have students in school synchronously 2 days a week and then asynchronously 3 days a week. And with synchronously 2 days a week, starting off, we are looking at our pre-K and life skills students, all grades, as well as our ELL students, which are English language learners, and previously I mentioned the nursing students. And then other students that principals thought really needed to be in school because they were just struggling and were not thriving at all with remote learning. So the principals actually did have the opportunity to bring in select students. And so they have done that. We have had nursing students on campus. We have had a large number of our pre-K special needs students on campus, and we've had a large number of our life skills students on campus, as well as students that the principals felt like needed to be on campus. So we've already had some in-person learning, but we want to expand that. Now, in addition to this hybrid model, parents will still have a choice. Parents can choose to remain completely virtual if they want to. So if parents are not comfortable with face-to-face learning, that's fine. They can still remain virtual, have their kids remain virtual. Now, looking at the school day, so our principals built into their schedules additional time for the mitigation strategies. So they built in time for the temperature checks. And then we also built in some of the additional time for the buses. Now, I actually put the time on the front end. So I put the time on the high school as opposed to the elementary school. So I will go back and talk with Spencer Gico about his will be allowed to attend on the same day, regardless of the letter of their last name. Okay, and then looking again at the cohort group, so cohort A will come Monday and Tuesday in person, and then Wednesday and Thursday will be asynchronous, which is virtual, and then Friday will also be an asynchronous day, but it may not be a live virtual day. Now, Friday, we've been talking about a lot of the learning loss that our students have experienced. So we've been talking quite a bit about Friday being more of a remediation day, but it being a day that the teachers will have the opportunities to still pull students one-on-one if they need to. And then some of the students who are taking state tests, they will conduct some remediation, intense remediation on Fridays. And then looking at cohort B, Wednesday and Thursday will be their in-person day. Monday and Tuesday will be their asynchronous learning day. And then once again, Friday will be an asynchronous learning day, with Monday and Tuesday being real time, and then Friday being independent learning or remediation based upon what the teacher recommends. And then the attendance approach that I'm recommending is a graduated attendance approach. And looking at the graduated attendance approach, I am recommending that all life skills students are able to return. Pre-K through 3 students are able to return. Grades 6 and 9 are able to return. And we are looking at these students returning on February the 8th. And hopefully that will give us some time to try to get the vaccines in enough arms and for us to make it past this peak that we are experiencing now in our county. And then looking at the second phase being grades 4 through 5, and then grades 7 through 8, and grades 10 through 12. They'll be beginning on February the 22nd. And once again, all of this is contingent upon metrics and mitigation strategies, and it is subject to change. But, we've got to start somewhere, and I keep making recommendations for us to start, and the numbers just keep going up. But anyway, this is what we are. So this is the recommendation for today, and that's based on today's numbers. And then looking at transportation, our buses will run, and then of course we will have parent dropout and parent pickup. Now, as far as food services is concerned, we will provide food at school. Now in October, I actually stated that we would not be dropping food off, doing any food deliveries, but we have found a way to be able to conduct food deliveries. So what we will do is we will provide the 5-day meal box on Fridays. And so what that will do is it will allow a student to be able to have a meal Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday if they're a Wednesday, Thursday child. And then the same is true if they're a Monday, Tuesday child. Of course, they'll have to store it or what have you. But it does provide those kids and those families with those meals. So we will drop off the meal boxes on Fridays, and this is provided that families sign up for the meals. So registration is required. If you have already signed up and you're already registered, you do not have to re-register. But if you have not registered, then you would want to register if you want to receive a meal on Friday, and that's a 5-day meal box. Then as far as grades are concerned, no changes here. Everything now is being graded for accuracy, minimum of 1 grade and maximum of 3 grades per week, being recorded. And then attendance is certainly important. And so we are asking kids to be physically present for in-person, obviously, as well as virtual numbers, July, October 12th, October 19th. And what I do is I actually do the numbers the day of the meeting because I want it to be the most relevant. So I was here yesterday actually working on these numbers, and the 2,195 did not change as far as the total number of new cases per 100,000 within the last 14 days. That number is the same that it was yesterday. It was about 1,500 on, well, 1,900 Friday, 1,500 Thursday. But then we can look at the percentage of RT-PCR positive tests. It is 11.3%. And that is actually going down from October. In October, it was 21.5% when the board made that decision. But now in January, it's 11.3%, and it is going down. And then looking here at the percent change in new cases per 100,000 within the last 7 days, it's a negative 13.5%, and once again, it's decreasing. And then I think yesterday was like 145.4, if I'm not mistaken. But it was still decreasing because it was a decrease from the 236%, which we had in October. And then, obviously, there is an increase in the total number of new cases per 100,000 over the last 14 days. And that is from 619.8 to 2,195. And we thought 600 was high in October, but now, of course, we're looking at January. All right, now this metric here is the CDC school reopening indicator metric matrix. And then looking here, they have everything color coded. Of course, green is good, then yellow not so much, and then red are cause for concern. So red would be the highest risk of transmission in school. And so when you look at this information, and I continue to just kind of expand the chart as we have board meetings and the board has to make decisions, I keep the previous data on the chart. So if you look, you see the data from July, and this column is the same here, and then this column is the same as it was from the previous slide. So we have two reds at the top, and then we are at a yes, and this yes is for mitigation strategies, and what the CDC recommends is that you have 5 key mitigation strategies, and you have to be able to conduct these mitigation strategies with fidelity in order to be able to minimize the risk of transmission. And so those 5 key mitigation strategies are, consistent and correct use of masks, and that may be a task for teachers, especially with the little ones, but, we are certainly going to work on it. We have made purchases, so the school division will provide masks, and we're going to work with our students on making sure that they keep their masks on. Social distancing, having proper hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette, cleaning and disinfecting, contact tracing, in collaboration with our local health departments. And all those things we are certainly doing. And then this is the percent change per 100,000 cases over the last 7 days. This column is green, and it has been green the entire time, and that's because it has to be above 80 in order for it to be at a higher risk of transmission, and every time this column is below 80. And this column represents the percentage of hospital inpatient beds in the community that are occupied. And so right now we have about 74.4% of our persons who are in hospital beds, or the hospital beds that are occupied. And that's based upon the data that was on the BDH's website today. All right. The next column is the percentage of hospital inpatient beds in a community that are occupied by patients with COVID-19. And we have 17.1% right now of the beds in the community that are occupied by persons with COVID-19. All right, so let's talk a little bit about vaccination, because, once again, like I stated, the information that I just shared with you, I shared with you in October. We were really glad to get that information from the CDC. They provided that guidance for us. They actually released it in September. But what it is are engaging in minimal to no social interaction, and some of our students are experiencing some forms of isolation. So one of the things that we are concerned about is our children's mental health. And I think I talked about this probably in one of my October presentations, if I'm not mistaken. But VDH actually has a one-pager on children's mental health. And they talk about and just kind of remind us of how important the child's social, emotional, and mental well-being is. And they say that students can get COVID-19, but in addition to them getting COVID-19, they also can experience trauma from being isolated, from not being engaged in social settings, and then just from experiencing stress and anxiety due to COVID-19. So they just want to remind us of that. And they're saying that they believe that this trauma that kids may face as a result of COVID-19, that this trauma may affect them across their lifespan. All right, so what is my recommendation? My recommendation is that we move to phase 2, and that we reopen for in-person learning, that we also continue with virtual learning, and that we allow parents to choose. And then I've already explained what the hybrid model is, which is phase 2. And then the dates, I've already talked about them, but I just listed them here as well, so everything will be on the same slide. And that will be February the 8th for grades pre-K 3, 6, and 8, and then all life skills students and English language learners. And then February the 22nd for grades 4 and 5, 7, 8, 10, 11, and 12. And then, of course, principals do have the flexibility to bring in different groups if they feel that they need to bring in some other students for whatever reasons. And principals have been doing that. So thank you all so very much. And I do want to say that this recommendation, once again, is only if metrics are favorable according to CDC and VDH guidelines. So we're looking almost, a month out, almost. So, but this is the recommendation that I have for today. Thank you.
So even though Dr. Shannon's presentation is listed under information items, I would like for the board to take action. So I'd like to, if you have questions for Dr. Shannon, please ask, but then I would like for us to take action in terms of moving to phase 2. But first, do you have any questions for Dr. Shannon? So then, do we have a motion then? Yes. Oh,
Explain to me, let's say, for example, a kid's going to be in Group B, or going Wednesday, Thursday, what is he going to be doing on Monday and Tuesday?
He'll be learning virtually. He'll be learning virtually, so he'll be at home. He's only coming to school 2 days a week. And we're only coming 2 days a week so that we can only have 50% of the students in the classroom so that we can maintain that 6 feet of social distancing, because we don't have enough space to have everyone here every day. So on the 2 days that the kid is off or at home, they'll
same day as our next meeting, I'm pretty sure I'll look at it already. When is the deadline for you to determine where within those metrics to return? When will you decide that? Because it's going, obviously it's gonna be before our next meeting. When will you determine for sure? Is
So
it
I
determined?
think it's going to be up to the board, first of all, to allow me the opportunity to be able to determine, because what has happened previously is we've had a call meeting, and then, you know, we may have a call meeting and decide, you know, the board may decide, or what have you. So,
Well, and I was gonna ask that question, Dr. Goodwin, when you said that we need to do an approval on it. I was under the impression that when we approved the phase reopening, or we were actually approving the phases, that we were then approving, yes, you know, we agreed with a phased structure of phase one, phase two, and then we were allowing the superintendent the leeway to say, it's safe now to move to phase two. So do we really need to approve the movement in between the phases?
I would feel more comfortable.
So if that's the case, then do we need to have a call meeting ahead of time to look at, you know, prior to February 8th? Are we indeed on track to do that on February 8th?
What we need tonight is to
Well,
agree that the superintendent can plan to return to hybrid instruction, to move to phase two, pending acceptable COVID rates. And then we can agree, and when we're gonna meet, we can set up tonight a date for the next meeting. But I think if we are going to return to hybrid learning, the time to plan is now, because it will take about a month to get the plan in place. So if we are thinking about moving to phase two, then the superintendent needs our support in terms of her planning to move to phase two. And then we can decide on a date to meet, like the last week in January or something, first week in February. What's your thinking?
I think that, what we need to do is go ahead and make a decision on whether or not we're gonna implement the phase. Because if we're gonna meet the end of January, I mean, you just said yourself that it takes a considerable amount of time to put this in place. Parents gonna need to, register for certain things. So, we need to decide tonight. I think that, what's been presented is adequate enough for me to say let's move to it. Of course, we always have a contingency plan if
There's a spike in
there's a
cases.
spike in cases with us within our buildings.
Is it possible that we have to have some type of meeting because the numbers have gone up and so on, the veterans number? Can we do it by phone conference? Maybe we have to have
Why would we do that?
an in-person meeting?
Yes, we do have to meet in person. You can call in, if you don't feel comfortable, then you can call in, but the majority of us need to meet in person. We need a forum to meet in person.
I just don't think it, doing it by phone conference, with the cases, the last minute things.
Those people who wish to call in, they do so, but I'm sure the quorum of us, at least 5 of us, will meet in person. Okay, so I think we have two possible scenarios here. One scenario is just to agree call for the question. So, Dr. Shannon, we'll do a roll call vote, if you would, please.
Mrs. Denise Bond? Yes. The other one, Ms. Reynolds.
You read Bond.
Mrs. Denise Bond? Yes. Mrs. Lynn Bradley?
Yes.
Dr. Deborah Goodwin?
Yes.
Mr. James Pope III? Mrs. Florence Reynolds? Yes. Mrs. Nona Roundtree? Mr. Christopher Smith Senior? Mr. William Marshall?
Yes.
And so we have majority saying yes, so we will accept the superintendent's recommendation to move to phase 2. The next agenda item, the student enrollment and the student teacher attendance report, Dr. Shannon.
Yes. So, based on the December 2020 enrollment report, we have 2,478 students, and inclusive of preschool and special education preschool students, we have 2,609 students. And then looking at the student teacher report, Nottoway is the winner of the student attendance award, and that is with 99.97% of students in attendance, so that's almost 100%. And then for teachers, it will be Capron with 97.59%. So congratulations to the teachers of Capron as well as Nottoway Elementary School.
Thank you. So pursuant to section 2-3711A1 and 2 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, the board upon a motion and a second will convene in a closed meeting to consider personnel and student matters for the 2021 school year. Do we have such a motion? I have a motion by Ms. Bradley, a second by Ms. Roundtree. So we will move to the library for closed session.